Right, welcome back to the Me, Myself, and Hopefully You podcast. My name is Tariq, a 19-year-old university student currently experiencing a midlife crisis. Why, you might ask? Well, university hasn't been exactly what I was hoping for, and I felt a bit lonely, so I decided why not start a podcast and hear more about ordinary people with extraordinary stories, and hopefully by learning about more about them, I can help create my own extraordinary story. So if you can relate or you just want to see where I end up, then make sure you stay subscribed because every Sunday right here on YouTube, we'll have a new episode. Speaking of new episodes, today's episode, well, let me give you some backstory. Recently, more specifically on the 26th of March 2021, it was, which feels actually quite long ago, well, it was the 50-year anniversary of independence for Bangladesh. Now, I've always wanted to know more about my heritage and my ethnicity, but I've always sort of struggled to learn about it because a lot of the information out there might not be reliable, or the people that sort of provide the information, English isn't a language that they're extremely comfortable in speaking with, or speaking in. Sorry, and I've spent my whole life. I love history. I'm studying it. I'm studying history and international relations. Half my degree is about history, so I love learning about the past. I've spent my whole life learning about the country that I live in, the country that I love. But I want to learn more about my parents' country, my grandparents' country, and my great grandparents' country, and hear more about where I came from. And so when I came across my guest today's blog, which I'll leave linked in the description, I knew he'd be the perfect guest. And I could just learn a lot from him, which I did, and get a great interview. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest at this time, his name is Aftab Rahman. He tells me more about the story of the history of Bangladesh and its fight for independence from current day Pakistan, including the Operation Searchlight, which was a military operation that led to up to 3 million Bangladeshi deaths and 10 million seeking refuge in India. Having discussed the story of the nation of Bangladesh, he then goes on to talk more about his own personal struggles, which included leaving his mum in Bangladesh to come live in England as a child, and his experiences of racism and bullying when he did get here from not only English people, but also fellow ethnic minorities. We also have a chat about his poor relationship with his stepmother and father, but how ultimately he ended up making a success of himself. And you'll hear more about how he did that and how he overcame the struggles that he did. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Aftab Rahman. So, Aftab, I just want to start off with asking you a few quick fire questions just to get to know you a bit more. The first quick fire question I want to ask you, it's a bit of a random one, but what is the last picture on your camera roll?
Oh my goodness. Probably some flowers from my garden.
That's why I asked you whether you had your phone on you. I had to make sure that do you have your phone on you? Did I ask you that? I can't even remember now.
I can check.
Yeah.
1 minute, 1 minute. Well, actually, the last photo is from a legacy kids badminton session. And that's for work purposes. But after that, yeah, it's a family basically.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get into legacy within the podcast, somewhere in the podcast. My next question is, who would you consider as a role model in life for you?
For me, probably Che Guevara.
Who's that?
Okay, so Che Guevara is a freedom fighter. He fought alongside Fidel Castro from Cuba. Well, he's originally from Spain, but he was in Cuba. Yeah, so look him up. He's an iconic figure. Yeah,
He
Che
fought
Guevara.
alongside Fidel Castro.
Yeah. He's a freedom fighter for Che Guevara, and he's just, you look him up, it'll blow your mind.
Yeah,
And he died for his ideals.
What's if there was one reason why you consider him as a role model, what would that reason be?
I think I'm a radical activist. I have been so all my life, and I think, you know, if it was my time, I would have fought and probably died for my ideals. But luckily, I don't have to do that. So yeah, just really believing in what you believe and seeing it through to the end. That's really important for me. Being true to oneself.
Well, it is interesting that you do mention sort of fighting for your ideals, especially the physical act of fighting, like Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, because that is something that we definitely want to get into at the beginning of the podcast. But before we do that, my final quick fire question is: if there was a house fire, where in your house, and everyone survived, but you could only keep one physical thing. Now, your laptop and your phone, because that was the most common answer from everyone before, I've agreed that that stays protected. So your laptop and your phone is fine, but you can only keep one item. What would the item be?
My camera.
Oh, it's a digital one, right? Why? So why your camera?
Well, I'm a photographer, so for me that's important to me, and it's a new camera, and I've got lots to learn on it, lots to explore, and being an artist, photography and writing is my art, and it's amazing what I can do with photography.
It's so interesting because the person that I have on the podcast just before you, she wrote a book recently, and she's spoken about how writing is her thing. Like it's just her thing that she just loves doing, and it helps her just express how she feels. And then I said, "Oh, I feel the same way about podcasting and recording myself." And then now you're saying something similar about how photography is your thing and writing is also your thing. I think it's so interesting to hear people who have different things that they just love doing. And even if it didn't make them any money in the world, they'd still do it because it just makes them feel a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's such a brilliant thing, and I think in society when we build relationships with each other, we should talk about more about what our things are. And it always makes for an incredible conversation as to why people enjoy doing a particular thing. Because for me, writing, I couldn't do it because I can never express myself in physical, like written words. I always stumble with my words, and I have to say something and then backtrack a little. It would just take me ages to write one blog. So
Yeah,
podcasting works for me.
but Tariq, you're too young to say you can't do it.
Oh no, I'm sure I can do it. Yeah, I'm not saying I can't do it. I try my best not to say I can't do something. It's just right now I definitely prefer just being able to record myself in front of a camera and just, but
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
yeah. I mean, the reason I say this is because I know you'll get into my background, but you need to understand that learning to write for me wasn't natural. It takes a lot of guts and lots of time and patience. And you've read my latest blogs, but it took me a good 3 or 4 years before I had the courage to do it. And it's a style, and it comes with time. So, uh, and I mean, I won't preempt some of the questions I think you'll have, but it's something that can be done, but it takes time. It takes you find your own style after a period of time, I guess.
Yeah, no, I bet. I mean, again, I don't want to get into it straight away, but I mean, based on your blogs, you write like you were born to write. Essentially, I loved reading it. It was great. It was really easily structured as well. Like there wasn't a point where I sort of got bored. It was like a story a lot of the time, and I loved it. But we'll get into that later. Before we
Okay.
get into that, after could you just sort of give us a brief introduction about you, about what you do, and a bit about your background?
Okay, so my name's Aftab Rahman, and I was born in Bangladesh. I came to the UK at the age of 6, lived here pretty much all my life, happily married with 2 amazing daughters, Maya, who's 14, Leia, who's 10. They drive me up the wall sometimes, but it wouldn't be the same without them. Um, my work, I love my work. I live for my work. My work, I'm the director for Legacy West Midlands, and I really take passion and love to my work, and I'm inspired by my colleagues, and I love working. So yeah, that's me. And the other
What?
thing you need to know, A, I cycle to work, and B, I also love gardening. So I do a lot of gardening. So hence your earlier question about flowers and gardens. So yeah, those are my kind of releases, if you like.
So, I mean, we had a chat before the podcast started. So, does that mean you cycle there and back 20 kilometers altogether, or do you
Yeah.
do? Wow, in a day, that's
No, 10,
every single
10
day.
there and 10 back. It's only
Yeah.
30 minutes each way. It's not a big deal.
Nah, that's impressive, man. That's impressive. You're putting yourself down. If I was doing that every single day, I mean, I wouldn't have as much sort of
No.
fat around my stomach right now as much as I
Well,
do.
we've got a national bike ride from Oldham to London over a 5-day period. And that's to celebrate 50 years of Bangladesh, raise awareness about the climate control, climate crisis, I should say, and also raise money to build a school in Bangladesh. So we're doing that in the last week of June, and that's going to be awesome. Yeah, you might want to sponsor us
I
actually,
know
but
I
it will
definitely
be.
will. I'll definitely try. I'm more than happy to donate some money because that looks like amazing cause. And I mean, even 20 kilometers every day. That's meant. I do a 10-kilometer run, right? And I'll take at least. I'll be like, I deserve a week off now. 10 kilometers. That's killed me on the legs. I'm finished. Now I went for like
Yeah.
a walk, a 20-kilometer walk today, and my leg is already gone. But I mean, besides the point. I mean, again, you mentioned there about the 50 years since Bangladesh's independence, and that is essentially where I want to start with you. Now, if people don't know, I mean, I'm sure I've mentioned it a million times. I'm Bengali. I have Bengali parents that were born in Bangladesh, so Bangladeshi parents. And well, I mean, I'll let you do the explanation. But I've always felt like I don't know my history as much as I should, and I've always tried to look it up online. But I wanted to always speak to someone that, okay, you weren't obviously there, but you would have had,
Mm.
your parents would have told you about it, and obviously with your job and what you do, you would have obviously learned more about it as well.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming your Bengali is probably, or your Bangla is probably amazing and a lot better than mine. So you probably can read, sort of transcripts from the 70s or whatever. No, you not do that.
No, no. Yeah, I can read. Sorry,
Yeah.
I can just about read. I'm not brilliant. I didn't spend that long in Bangladesh, so I can get back. I can speak Sylheti, I can speak Bangla, so I can get by
I
very
mean, but
well.
even then, you'll know more than I do about sort of the Bangladesh War of Independence. So that's where
Yeah,
I want to
sure.
start. Could you tell us a bit more about the Bangladesh War of Independence and why this year particularly was such an important celebration?
I think before we start on the War of Independence, I think what we need to understand is the whole political subcontext of the situation and how it came to be, how we came to be East Pakistan. We need to understand that. So through the partition of India, um, Bangladesh, based on a majority Muslim country, became part of Pakistan when it was then East Pakistan. We were known as East Pakistan, with 1,000 kilometers between us, and the rule actually took place from West Pakistan. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the architect, or it was part of his vision and part of what happened by the English colonial rulers that did the partition. But I think if Muhammad Ali Jinnah didn't die so quickly, I think things may well have been slightly different, because he had visions and he had a greater appreciation for certain things. But sadly, he died soon after partition, and then things started to change a lot. Political powers changed and so on. And in my view, what kind of the precursor to the Bangladeshi independence was in 1952, where West Pakistan tried to impose Urdu as a national language. And during that decree, there was student protest, which was held in 1952, 21st of May. And it was a peaceful protest led by students from Dhaka University. And this student protest was attacked and shot at, and 5 people sadly lost their lives. Salam, Jabbar, Tariq, I think. The other 2 names don't come to me straight away. And that was the kind of movement that sort of led towards this feeling of nationalism and so on, and we want our own state and so on. And Sheikh Mujib was very active in the Awami League. He was a very charismatic leader. I mean, he wasn't the only one. There's many other notable leaders during that period, but he is very much seen as the leader that emerged to make Bangladesh independent. So what most people don't know is that in 1970, December, there was an election, okay? And Sheikh Mujib won the election. He won something like 90% of the vote. He should have been the president or the prime minister of West Pakistan and East Pakistan. But the power at the stage was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and I think Yahya Khan. They did not concede power. They were not going to give up power to this Bengali leader at the time. So he was not allowed or invited to form a government. And
So,
on, yeah,
sorry,
go
can
on.
I just interrupt there? Can I just ask a
Yeah.
question? So, was he voted by the West people in West Pakistan and people in East Pakistan to be the ruler of all of Pakistan?
Yeah, so he
Oh,
won
okay,
something
I
like
didn't know that.
80%. Well, you can unravel it all where the votes came from. Awami League had a presence during that period. During that period, you had the Muslim League, PKK, Pakistani People's Party, and so on. So the votes got pretty split up, and Sheikh Mujib kind of won overwhelming majority of the votes, and he was supposed to be the president, and he wasn't invited to form a government. So that's just subcontext that you need to understand. And on the 6th of March, Sheikh Mujib gave a rousing speech. Something like 10,000 people were there, or maybe more, at the Dhaka racecourse on the 6th of March, 1971. And that speech, it was just so powerful. It's akin to what Martin Luther King did. It's as powerful as that. And that speech is the speech that galvanized the nation. He said, "Ebare Shangram, Shadinata Shangram." You know, this fight is for freedom, and it's translated like that. And this speech is now recorded and kept with UNESCO as a famous speech and so on. So that's how powerful that speech is. Um, on the 26th of March, or leading up to that, he was arrested and he was flown to West Pakistan and kept in a jail. And then um, General Zia announced independence of Bangladesh through radio, and then he said on the name, and then he announced again, and he said in the name of Sheikh Mujib. So Sheikh Mujib is very much referred to as the father of the nation and so on. And the War of Independence lasted 9 months, and some estimates say up to 3 million people were killed. That's never been verified. On the 26th of March, they set up Operation Searchlight, where they um, attacked civilians and so on. And there's some
From
horrific
West
things that,
Pakistan on East Pakistan, yeah.
yeah, and there was some horrific things that happened along the way. You know, you had what you call the Razakars. There was some people who even to date argue that Bangladesh should have remained with Pakistan. It's a Muslim country and so on. So there are those sentiments, and it was those Muslim League people and Razakars and what you call them, they were the collaborators with the Pakistani army, and they went around and showed people who were non-Bengali. Actually, what they would do with some of the men is they'd ask them if they were Muslim, they'd ask them to speak kalima and so on, because at the time, and still, Bangladesh has a has quite a sizable Hindu population and Buddhist population, and if they weren't able to recite it, they were killed. On other occasions, they were asked to take their trousers down to see if they were circumcised. So some horrific things happened. The women, uh, between 200,000 to 400,000 women were raped. They were kept in rape camps. So it's horrific genocide. It was Tariq Tariq Ahmed or Tariq Ramadan talks about the first act of genocide after World War II. So, towards the end, they were trying to wipe the intelligentsia out of the Bangladeshi community. So they identified intellectuals, reporters, and so on, and they killed people on the 15th of December, even though they knew they were going to surrender. So the other thing to bear in mind is the geopolitics that was being played out at the time. So if you speak to some Pakistani people, they said, "Oh, well, we were at war with India as well." And the truth is, all wars have allies. If you look at World War II, Britain had America and lots of allies. So India was our ally. But Pakistan's ally was America. US gunships were en route to the Bay of Bengal. So geopolitics was being played out across the world at that time. And Bangladesh was no different at the time. We did win through the aid of India. They opened their borders. They helped to train our guerrilla force, which is called the Mukti Bahini. And India opened up their borders. There were camps, refugee camps, and so on doing there. And Bangladesh organized itself through one of the leading figures and the architecture of the war was General Usmani, who was the colonel at the time, and he is the one who's credited with organizing the forces that fought back, and civilians fought back, and so on. So it was a horrendous period of our history, and you know we lost a lot of people. It was a sad period, and if I was a young man at that time, I'd have fought and probably died, but I'm glad I didn't have to make that choice. Um, I was one at the time, and I still get very emotional about it all. But we are here, and you know, if anybody asks, we are descendants of warrior poets and freedom fighters. So don't take us lightly. We will stand and fight, regardless of our diminutive figures and so on. So we have a proud heritage in history that we emanate from.
I mean, that's exactly why I started. Again, one of the many reasons why I wanted to get you on. I saw a tweet from. I don't know how I actually saw a tweet from you. I think Jess Phillips might have replied to you or something like that.
Oh yeah, the one with my arms up like that, hands
Yeah,
up.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah,
I think Jess, because I follow Jess Phillips, and I think she replied to you, and it was on the anniversary of the Bangladesh War of Independence.
yeah,
I was like, oh, I wonder who this guy is, and so I clicked on your profile, and then I saw you had a blog. I checked out your blog, and I was like, you know what, this guy's got a really interesting story, and I've always wanted to know more about the Bangladesh War of Independence. And I've spoken to my grandma about it, and my dad sort of translated it back to me, but we've never sort of, as a family, properly ever kind of talked about it. It's only if I persistently ask questions, but I'm always sort of hesitant to ask because obviously my grandma was there, and she she's told me like a few little stories of what it was like, and I think I remember her telling me something about how they could hear like guns coming from the
yeah.
distance and they had to run away. So I don't like to ask too many because I understand it probably
It's trauma.
yeah, it's traumatic for her, obviously. So I
Yeah,
don't want to ask her too many questions. And my granddad passed away a few years ago, so I can't ask him any questions. Um, and so I wanted to get you on to tell me more about that. And I just find it so fascinating. Just before we sort of get onto your story, I've just got a few quick questions about what you said. So you mentioned that Jeep, what happened?
Yeah.
Yeah, what happened to him? Because the last thing I heard from you was that he went to prison.
Yeah, so whilst he was in prison, he was declared the president of Bangladesh. After independence, he came and he was initially the president of Bangladesh, and then he became the prime minister of Bangladesh. He's referred to as the father of the nation. Bangabandhu is the word that's used for him. But within 4 short years of his rule, sadly, he didn't rule very well. He was faced with famine and unemployment and so on. And there was political cronyism, nepotism, and so on. So he was getting certain things wrong, basically. And towards the end of his life, he declared martial law. He was a socialist to start with, and he had a very good relationship with Cuba, actually, with Fidel Castro. So there's photos of him and Fidel Castro. And the interesting thing is Bangladesh's biggest import was jute, and they started importing jute to Cuba. So
What's
that's
that?
just a bit
Sorry.
of side issue.
Yeah.
Jute, Jute. Look it up. It's just what they do traditionally. They used to make rope with
Right.
it. You know, the big cargo ropes, the small ropes, and they make shoes and bits and bobs. So it's called jute. It's a natural fibrous material. You see all those bags, the Hessian
Mm.
bags that you see, the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
cloth bags or the Hessian bags, that's jute. So it's a really important material in Bangladesh, and it's starting to make a slow comeback, actually.
Oh, okay.
So going back to Sheikh Mujib, 4 years into his rule, he was assassinated. His whole family, bar two of his daughters who were in Germany at the time, they were all killed. And there were several coups at the time. And eventually, Ziaur Rahman emerged as he was a general at the time. He emerged as the next president of Bangladesh or prime minister, whatever you like it. And he ruled for another 4 years, and he was assassinated,
Wow.
sadly. But Sheikh Mujib was the leader of the Army League, and the interesting thing is, General Zia was the leader of Bangladesh National Party. He came in as a coup, and within a year or two, he had a free election, and he was returned as the prime minister. Now, Sheikh Mujib's daughter, Sheikh Hasina, is now the president or prime minister of Bangladesh. And the leader of the opposition, Khaleda Zia, is Zia's
Yeah.
wife. So what we have in Bangladesh is what we refer to as dynastic politics in the East. So that's still there. And very much when one party gets into a power, they force the other party and they make all sorts of allegations, some of it true, some of it untrue. So right now, Sheikh Hasina is moving towards a single party type element of Bangladesh. What her father tried to do, she is realizing that dream. So the last two elections were not open and fair. Um, in the past, Bangladesh has had independent observers when elections were run to ensure that there's fairness. But recently, the last two elections, there hasn't been any of that. Opposition leaders have been prisoned and so on. The other sad thing in Bangladesh now is that freedom of speech is being curtailed. So journalists who speak freely against the government are often imprisoned, and some have even disappeared. So it's not as democratic as we'd like it to be, but we are where we are, and we hope that Bangladesh emerges stronger in the long run. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, I think everyone we've got to remember that Bangladesh is still very much a young nation. You know, it obviously the people are always there, but Bangladesh and the term Bangladesh for a country and to be recognized as a country, it's still very young. It's still sort of in that beginning phase of things in the grand scheme of things. And yeah, like you said, hopefully we do see a more democratic procedure. I don't know how that's going to come about. I know that Sheikh Hasina, at least from I don't know anyone in this country when it comes to my relatives that are a fan of her. My sort of final question about this, actually two questions about the story, or the Bangladesh War of Independence. So General Zia and Sheikh Mujib, were they sort of working together originally, and then they fell out essentially, or did
Uh,
one of them just get assassinated and then the other
it,
one
it
took
it's
control?
it's quite convoluted. So General Zia was a key figure during independence. He played a big role. He was a commander in the army during that period. And he was a serving commander or army chief during the period of Sheikh Mujib. So they may well have worked together. I'm not 100% sure. But certainly when Sheikh Mujib was assassinated, there were several coups, and he's the one who came in and kind of restored some order during that period. And if you look at some of his history, he actually transformed himself from a military man to an actual diplomat and so on. And he did some important things around UN and so on. So he was quite a significant figure in his time, you know, a notable figure.
When you sort of look at Bangladesh now, and I know we slightly touched on it, what sort of, and you mentioned earlier on that you are an activist and you remain an activist. What sort of things are you personally, are you still fighting for some things in Bangladesh, or are your activism related to other things in other countries?
So look, you know, when I go to Bangladesh, I'm a guest, you know, as much as it's my place of birth. And you can only fight so much. And there's always village politics, there's always issues with land and so on. And that happens in Bangladesh. So there's always a case against this thing and that thing. And
Oh,
then,
I know all about that.
yeah. So we get that. So my father was a landowner, and there's several bits of the land that's in dispute. So we get that. But my activism is very much in the UK,
Okay.
and my action is in the UK very much.
Mm. So, I mean, we've looked at the sort of Bangladesh War of Independence. Actually, no, I have got sort of one final question about it. What? So, what was it? 50 years this year?
Yep.
Right. Okay. So it was 50 years this year. Oh
Yep.
yeah, obviously, because it was 1971 when it ended. Um,
Yeah.
there's another thing as well, isn't there? I can't even remember what it was, because there's something that happened. Obviously, that's already happened, and then there's another thing in December. Am I right?
Yes. So what you have is 26th of March is Declaration of Independence. So that's when we declared we are a country. And it was 16th of December is the Victory Day. So that's when we won the war. So those are very, very significant days in our Bangladeshi calendar.
Ah, see, so the declaration, was that when it was announced on the radio in the name of Sheikh Mujib, we are
Yeah.
the whatever. Ah, okay,
Yeah.
I see. And then I'm assuming that the December day was uh, West Pakistan had pretty much surrendered.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned actually as well, you mentioned that West Pakistan had the backing of the United States.
Yep.
So did the United States properly get involved? Because I would have thought if
No,
the United States got involved, that's it, it's game over for everyone.
they didn't, but there was lots of diplomatic wranglings going on. India had, sorry, America had deployed USS warships. They were heading towards the Bay of Bengal, so there was movements. There was, I think, India was being backed by China. So, you know, there was politics being played out at the time. So you have to look into it deeply to really understand. I think America's foreign minister was Henry Kissinger at the time. So I think big superpowers had this games that they played in other
Yeah, I
people's
mean, it was the
countries.
midst of the Cold War, wasn't it? So it was like,
Yeah,
if you support one side, we're going to support the other side. So I'm
yeah,
guessing that that was the situation at the time. It's
yeah,
interesting because it's completely changed now, because well, at least when President Trump was in charge, it was India were very much aligned with the United States, and Pakistan have now got this really strong and new relationship with China, where they want to build that whole railway with China, and Xi Jinping has allegedly got quite a good relationship with Imran Khan. I don't know how much you know about that. It's very interesting to see the developments that the between the Pakistan and the Chinese governments. Now it seems to have completely flipped, and it'll be interesting to see sort of what Bangladesh's allegiances go towards. I would assume it goes towards India, and so therefore, essentially, whatever India does, we'll just follow. But like I said, it will be interesting to see. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I mean, nothing stays the same. People realign, things change. America isn't the country that it used to be. China is a global superpower along with Russia and so on. So things change. I mean, don't forget, America gave Pakistan a really hard time during the Iraq war. So some of the relationship has been strained of late. So things change, and it's politics. Different people, different brooms come in, and different policies emerge, as you know.
Yeah, no, I know all about that as well. That's what I've been studying for the last year, and my interest has been definitely within politics for the last God knows how many years. As many people who are watching probably already know, I can't shut up about politics, which is why I'm asking you so many questions.
Okay.
And now I want to sort of finally get onto your story.
Okay.
And I was fascinated by it when I read your blog. I want to start essentially right from the beginning. You were born in Bangladesh, you've mentioned, and then you had to leave Bangladesh. You came to England at the age of 6 with your dad. What was that like?
Um, uh, I was 6, and the thing I can remember most was, you know, what you find is trauma. Okay, only now I understand it as trauma, and you bury things that hurt you. And leaving Bangladesh was painful, so I buried the memories. I have no collective memory of my mother's face when I was a child, even when I was 9. So um, coming back to the first memories of the UK when I first arrived was I recall the only memory I have when I first arrived in UK was being lonely. We were in a house in London. The plan was that we'd stay in London and become tailors. And I remember being comforted by my elder sister who took care of me. So those are my memories from that period.
Yeah, no. Am I right in saying that was your older sister Mina?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so she sort of took you under her wing, and she almost looked after you, almost
yeah,
like a mother figure, wasn't she?
yeah,
Um, at least
yeah,
that's what it came across. And
yeah.
you came. Am I right? You came in like 1976 or something.
Yeah, 76 I came in that period. Yeah,
That was a good recollection. I don't even have that written down as well.
yeah,
I'm quite proud of myself for that. So you came in 1976. So that is sort of the midst of the beginning of South Asian people sort of coming into England,
yeah.
and this huge immigration sort of movement now, at the time. And you had the likes of Enoch Powell, who was this, for people who don't know, and Enoch Powell was this right wing sort of anti-immigration, was he a politician? He was more like a
It was.
figurehead almost. Yeah.
He was a
Oh,
politician. But that has to be qualified. So what you need to understand is that within the post-war migration to the UK, it was people from the Caribbean who came, and then it was also people from India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And what you had was that with the Indian families and the Pakistani families, their families joined them pretty soon. Okay, whereas within the Bangladeshi family, there was this myth of return. They always felt that they'd go back. They bought land and so on, and it was only during the 70s when things started to change in Bangladesh. So you had the Liberation War, you had the famine, and so on, and people felt that we should bring our families back. And I've interviewed people from that period, one of the things they said is we don't we didn't want to raise our children in on Islamic country. And the irony is that the funny thing is now, in my village, there's only one mosque. But if I go to Lazals, where I grew up, there's about 20 mosques.
So Lazarus
And
is more
yeah,
Islamic
and
than your
yeah,
village.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Eritrean, Kenyan, different types of mosques, and each time somebody falls out, they go and make a mosque. So it's interesting. So yeah, and families from the Bangladeshi community started joining in the mid 70s to towards the 80s and early 90s is when the reunification happened.
Right. Okay. So I mean, so you obviously these, like you sort of mentioned, they weren't going back. And you mentioned the whole ironic story there. I mean, I want to touch on sort of the feel. I mean, I know you were young back then.
Mm.
I want to talk about what the feeling was like in England at the time, especially with the Enoch Powell speeches. I think is it, I can't remember what the speech is called, something Rivers of Blood or something like that.
Rivers of blood, rivers of blood.
Yeah.
So what I vividly remember is, I mean, Enoch Powell gave his speech. I think could have been 78 or
Mm.
76 or 78 maybe. I was too young to be interested in politics, but only later found out. But when I was a teenager, uh, my dad used to say, you know what, they might throw us out of the country. There was clear debates around what we're going to do. So clearly there was that on the one hand. And then you had Idi Amin on the other hand, who had expelled people from Uganda, Asians from Uganda. And then from East African Asians were weren't expelled from Kenya, but some chose to leave because things were getting a bit difficult. So you had all this kind of, you had an example of people being thrown out of country. So it could have happened to us. So that was the feeling that my father used to share. And, it was important for him to continue to acquire wealth in Bangladesh. He wanted to be in a position to survive um, if he was forced out, basically, you know. So that was the sentiments at the time.
Right. Okay. Obviously, for like I said, you were still young at the time. Now, and following that, or following that sort of period, your dad would go on to live in Bangladesh because, I mean, just to sort of be clear, your mum was still in Bangladesh.
Yeah,
You and your dad came over, and like you said, you were sort of you were raised and expected to sort of become tailors and what have you, and work here, and then send money back home so your dad could, as for anyone that's Bengali, it's a typical sort of Bengali
story.
story, yeah,
Yeah.
where you'd be expected to send money back home, and that's how it would go. But it didn't really go like that, did it?
No, I mean, to put it into context, I came with my stepmother and six of my, I think it was five at the time, because my younger sister was born here. Five of my half brothers and sisters, and I grew up with them. And my dad, what he would do is he would stay in England for a few years, and then he'd go back to Bangladesh. So my mum was still in Bangladesh with four of my siblings at the time. And when I was 9, I went back with him. So that was a pattern in his life. He was trying to be a dad in two countries, and he wasn't doing it well in either country, in my view. And in 1990, it's when my mum came and my brothers and sisters came. That's when he settled in the UK and didn't go back as often. Um, yeah.
So, did your dad still have sort of land in Bangladesh at the time, or was
Oh
it?
yeah, we've still got land.
Mm.
We've got a big barry where we stay. I take my daughters back to their ancestral home, and it's really really important for them to have a stake in their heritage and to understand their heritage. I think it's vital because we live in a multicultural society. We need to understand and appreciate where we come from and value what we have. You know, But, I mean, listen, growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was almost a crime to be a Bangladeshi person. It was, you didn't say you were Bangladeshi. You kind of hid it in some respects, and you were bullied and harassed from all corners, from initially white people, but some of the worst harassment came from the Pakistani community, where they picked on you, and they were slightly bigger, more aggressive, and all of that happened throughout my youth, really. And that's when you have to stand up and fight, and that's what I did to defend
Could
myself.
could you sort of touch more on the experiences of bullying that you had from it from anyone at the time, from
Uh,
essentially for just being Bangladeshi?
I think well, the first instances of bullying were from racist white thugs. That was the first incidence. There was clearly incidents of what is referred to as pake bashing, being chased and attacked by skinheads and so on. That was quite normal at the time. You grew up in an area, and if you moved into or walked or strayed into another area, the chances of being attacked was quite quite vivid, or actually happened. And in school there was bullying from largely white young men, or young boys at the time. So bullying wasn't far away. Um, I think during the early 80s, the Bangladeshi community started to organize. Maybe isn't the right word. They certainly organized in London, but certainly in Birmingham, what they were doing was we're all trying to be Bruce Lee. There was this kind of affinity to Bruce Lee because he was small and we were small, and you had these movies where he'd take on 20 people and kick their ass, and we felt, you know what, if we learned kung fu, would be okay. So a few of us went and taught ourselves kung fu. I went for a short period and realized we couldn't afford it, so I didn't go. One of my friends at the time uh, almost became a world champion in kung fu. So it kind of gave us a bit of credibility, and he was referred to as, the strong guy and somebody who could kick you, and things like that. And they could literally. So that was a bit of saving grace for us. So yeah, in terms of my physicality, I was slim at the time and very sporty, very active. Um, and it was only when I was 17 or 18, I started to go to the gym and uh, do weight training and stuff like that. So I became a bit bigger, and being able to, assert my strength a little bit more. So I stood up for myself, and stood up for people in my community and fought back, literally fought back. A lot of the aggression in the early days came from white people. It was also aggression from African Caribbean young people at the time. And the worst aggression came from the Pakistani young men. So we had it from all fronts, really.
Like you guys, it was from everywhere. Like
Yeah.
especially for you, for someone that you'd left home essentially at a very young age. You came, you had no friends, then you were getting bullied. And to make matters worse, sort of, I remember seeing on your blog about how I mean, am I right in saying you didn't really have the best relationship with your stepmother because she sort of saw you were the child of another mother or another wife that was still alive. It's not like your
Yeah.
mum had died; she was still in Bangladesh, and your dad was still seeing her. And for people that don't sort of understand, I know for a lot of people listening, they're going to be like, "Wait, what? He had two wives? Why did he have two wives? Like that's just crazy." But that was, very much a normal thing, especially in the Bengali community. You had almost the South Asian community where you had a wife back home, and then you also had a wife in England. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So my dad married twice, and I was raised by my stepmom. She sadly passed away, um, and I don't begrudge her at all. It was very, very difficult for her. I mean, raising 6 children at the time, 7 with me included. and for periods of time, my dad wasn't around, and she had to deal with me. I wasn't a good child. I was naughty. I played up, and she dealt with me. She'd beat me and so on, and that's what happened during that period. That's, if you speak to anybody from my generation, they'll tell you that beating was quite normal. So I got it from my stepmom, I got it from my older brother, and I got it from my dad when he was around. Quite horrendous, some of the things he used to do. So violence was very much part of our lives. It wasn't, uncommon to be hit and hurt and so on. My stepmom would tell me to go and get a singler branch from the garden, and I would, and that was used to ensure discipline. And I had my fair share.
You get your own. You'd literally go out and get
Yeah,
the weapon that was going to be used to
yeah,
to punish you. Yeah, it was the normal
yeah,
thing back then. Yeah,
yeah. They call it a singler, a
yeah,
little
yeah, yeah.
stick. So
Oh,
you had it.
I got the Singler a few times as well, to be fair. And
Did
again, I
you?
probably, yeah, let's be honest. I mean, I got it in 2000 and, like 2005 time ish, and I was a little knobhead, honestly. Um, and to be fair, it's weird because people look at me now and like I'm like perfect goody two shoes like in school and stuff. But like when I look back, I'm thinking, yeah, I was like I have an older sister, and I was definitely the more naughty one out of the two. I wasn't really naughty, but I definitely deserved my fair share of Singler experiences.
Yeah.
um, Nothing too crazy though. I was very lucky in that sense. So I mean, I want to get on from there. Still with sort of with your stepmom. You mentioned there were seven of you. She obviously had a lot on her plate. Your dad was going back to Bangladesh to obviously stay there as well. And you at one point you went back to Bangladesh with your dad at 9 years old, and this was
Yeah.
the first time you saw your mum. And I can immediately see the smile in your face there because I'm guessing it sort of brings back some sort of happy memories there because it was the first time you saw your mum since you left her. And what was that like?
Well, I'm smiling because it's a real funny story. I think you've read it, but your listeners won't know what happened. So I was 9 at the time. I went back to Bangladesh, I think during the 6 weeks holidays, and I stayed for a year. But I recall being in a boat, and it kind of tethered to our barri, and I jumped out of the boat and ran in. And ran into the barri as you go in, and kind of started going inside. And then I saw this woman, and she was chasing me. And I ran back to the boat, and I said, Dad, this woman's chasing me. And he said, that's your mum. And I thought, oh, okay, all right, fine.
Did you know you were going to go see your mum?
Yeah, I did. But
Well, it just didn't clock at the time that that was her.
it didn't clock. I mean, as I said to you earlier, you have trauma and so on. And I blocked out what she looked like. Even to date, I cannot recall what she looked like at the time when I was 9 and 10. People do remember faces, but I can't remember it. Um, you know, I it was a lovely period of my life. I was there for a year. I was like somebody out of Jungle Book. I ran around all day, only came home to sleep and eat. Literally, swam in the rivers, climbed the mango trees and boroi and all sorts of stuff. Uh, Went to mosque briefly. Didn't really enjoy it. Went to school briefly, but very much it was a carefree childhood. There was another two. My dad had three brothers, so I had an uncle and two uncles and their families. So there was lots of cousins. So there was lots of children to play with. We used to swim all day long. It was a fun period. Yeah.
No, I bet it was. Yeah, no, it's living the life, like you said, mango trees, everything, chilling.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, life isn't like that. At least not forever. And
Yeah.
eventually, you obviously had to return back home, back to England, and you had to go back to school. But a year out of school, especially at that young age, it wouldn't have done you any favors. going back, having missed a full year. And you definitely struggled, didn't you?
Yeah. So when I returned, I was put into what they call extra English classes. Um, my English wasn't great, so I had to relearn some of my English and so on. And subsequently went to secondary school. I didn't do well at all at school, um, partly because nobody told me I was clever, and partly also because everybody else around me didn't value education. All my friends, all my peer group, they're all messing around like me, so with bag school and so on. And my parents didn't really believe in me. I was going to go and work in a restaurant and so on. The teachers didn't believe in me, and I don't blame them. I was just playing up a lot, and they didn't see that I could be clever. So I don't really blame them. There's several factors. So I left school with no qualification at all. They put me on a silly 365 City and Girls course. It was a certificate, nothing of note. I left school with that. And we had a bit of a comfort blanket. Everybody felt, well, you know what, who needs an education? We're going to work in a restaurant. And the teachers probably felt, well, they're going to work in a factory or something, menial job. What do they really need education for? So you had all of that being played out.
Mm.
And as it happened, I spent my first year out of school training to be a mechanic. I wanted to be a mechanic because my cousin was a mechanic, and then realized actually I don't like it. I spent 1 year doing it. I didn't like my hands being greasy. I didn't like the cold and all of that. So after that, I went and started to work in restaurants, and I did what most Bangladeshi young men did during the 80s and early 90s. It was quite simple. Your career choice was quite simple. If you spoke English, you'd be a waiter. If you didn't, you'd be a chef.
All
So
right. So it was based on that. It was like the interview was, right, do you speak English? No, well, you're there. If do you speak
uh,
English? Yes, well, you're there. There you go. And there's no other thing, just that.
no, and you started your career when you were some of my friends started when they were 13, 14, 15. You worked Friday and Saturday part-time, and you earned a bit of money, and it was okay actually. I don't begrudge the experience. I was 15 when I started it, and it felt as the first time in my life, in my young life, I was valued because I was bringing money to the house, because the money I was bringing, most of it was going to my mom, and for a period I was being valued as an earner. And also on a personal note, it was the first time I could actually buy nice clothes. I remember buying, I think, Nike trainers or something like that. And it's the first time that I had more than one pair of shoes at any one given time. So you can understand the level of poverty for young people during that period. So, and I was part of that poverty. And at the time, you don't see it as poverty because everybody else around you is poor. Even the white people are poor, so you just get on with it.
Yeah, you described in your blog, I think I've got it up here. You described as feeling emancipated,
Yeah.
having received a job. And I remember when I read that, I thought, emancipated, you're getting paid £16 for a 20-hour week. That's less. What kind of that's the opposite of emancipation. That is quite literally slave labor. But obviously at the time, and especially as a 15-year-old boy, that would have been crazy. Like I remember when I first got paid, and it was actually at a takeaway. And when I think about it, I got paid less than minimum wage by my own dad. But it was the first few weeks, but it was the best thing ever when I got it, because I was like, wow. And I got to keep all of it. You only got to keep £6 from that
Yeah.
£60 for 20 hours. And you felt amazing from it, and it must have felt pretty incredible as well.
Yeah, but what you don't realize, or what people don't acknowledge, right? The skills that I learned at 15, I still carry with me. Customer service skills, working in a team, leadership, taking orders, all of those things I carry with me. you know, and it's just a skill. So and it's a skill that's transferable. I can take it to any job. You know, working under pressure is on another level when customers are waiting to be served.
Yeah,
You've got to learn to work under pressure, and you don't learn that in an office in the same way as you do when you got 10 people waiting to be served. So it's just
yeah.
different, and the camaraderie you get from it. It's and the other thing I learned was uh, being more Bangla. I learned how to speak better
Mm.
and communicate, and you also learn the nuances and how these people how Bengalis communicate and all the other stuff. So I learned all of that. So I don't begrudge it. I take it as a lesson learned, really.
Oh, you know, it's so weird how much I relate to what you're saying because you know this was in the 80s, and I worked in a takeaway for about 2.5 years, 2.5 years, and I only just finished it in September 2020, so I started in about 2018. But I feel the exact same way. Like at the time, it was annoying to do because I was doing A levels and I had another part-time job as well. But I was doing it, and when you talk about transferable skills, you know, and it did make me a lot more about it improved my Bangla a lot because everyone
Yeah,
was speaking Bengali most of the time. And so I had to speak Bangla with them. And then on top of that, you know, things like team working and probably most of all is working under pressure. There's
yeah,
nothing more pressurizing than when you've got a customer that's on the phone that's complaining about something or wants something. And then you've got my dad who owns the takeaway complaining about me because I've made a mistake somewhere else and asking me, what the hell have you done here? And I'm like, I'm trying to talk to a customer and I'm trying to talk to my dad at the same time. And I'm like, I can't do this. It's like it's ridiculous amount of pressure, especially when your dad's like full on telling you you need to sort it out or you need to do better. I mean, to be fair, he was very lenient on me. I was actually quite lucky. I feel like if I was the owner of the takeaway, I'd be thinking. But like my dad, it's weird, especially with customer service. I always say this. The reason why I learned how to, you know, give customer service as well as, you know, I can. I'm not saying I'm amazing at it, is because my dad always has the mentality as if this is like the 1980s and he has to impress everyone in the takeaway,
mm,
everyone in the country, because obviously at the time and even now, if you the way Asian takeaways are run is they've got everything's got to be spick and span. We've got to be perfect. We've got to offer the best to the thingy, because the English people need to like us. Because obviously this was new, they need to love our food because we want them to come. And it's still the sort of same mentality is we want them to love our food. We want them to
mhm.
love the service. We want everything to be perfect. And that was drilled into me whilst I was at the takeaways. Everything needs to be perfect. Any slight demand, even if it causes us some problems, we need to meet every single customer
Yeah,
need. And it definitely taught me that.
that's good though, isn't it?
Mm.
It's a good skill to have, right?
It is. It definitely
Yeah,
is. And I've used it in many different interviews, and they're always impressed when they ask me something like, "Oh, name a situation when you were pressured at work." And I was like, "Well, flipping every day when I was at work in the takeaway, six
yeah,
thirty hit, it got busy, and that was it."
yeah,
So I mean, we've spoken about where were we? So we've spoken about you got your job there, you were working in the restaurant, and then you started working at Curry's at 19 years old. And this is, you know, something that is very much, you know, an English job.
yeah,
At least now, like there's always sort of, especially amongst friends my age, Asian boys, you start off in a takeaway or a restaurant, but then you go to an English job, and it's like like I'm starting to make it
yeah,
now. You
yeah,
know what
yeah.
I mean? Was that? I don't. I know English people listening to it now will be like, "What's he on about? What does he mean English? What's an English job?"
Yeah,
And
I
it's kind of
mean,
like is that how
the,
it
the
felt at the time?
well, the interesting thing is, I made a big transition, but I didn't do it overnight. So when I worked in a restaurant in Bedford, I went and volunteered in the local electrical store. I said, "Look, I want to learn a new skill." And they said, okay. So I used to work in the restaurant between 12 and 3 or 12 and 2. And then from 3 till 5, I'd go and volunteer. And just so when I went and applied for a job at Curry's, I says, well, I volunteered. And they're like, what? You volunteer? I says, yeah, that's what I did. Um, and, you know, people in my community were saying, well, look at him, he's going to work for Curry's. And at the time, it's a part-time job. And they were like, well, he's left a full-time job to go and work a part-time job. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do at this stage in my life. And Yeah, and at the time I went back to college part-time to do a BTEC National in Business and Finance, and and I also started working in the community, youth work. I started managing the local football team and used to volunteer at the local youth club. So that all changed my life. I got my calling, and it's a bit corny. At 19, I set my life goal. My life goal was simply to help, you know, and that's what I went about doing. And last year, I refined my life goal. It's to help and serve. So I see my purpose in this world is to serve, and to help. That's me. That's what I want to do.
Um, you mentioned there about your life calling was to help. And you did well. You were eventually starting to do that. You know, through many different means. But before we sort of touch on that a little bit, I just want to sort of touch on when at 20 years old, again, your life completely turned around because your mum came from Bangladesh, and she started living with you guys. Am I right?
Um, no, my dad again tried to keep that family in London, and my
Mm.
mum refused. She said, "I'm not staying in London. I need to be near my son." And he managed to get a property in Les Halles, and it's quite difficult actually because it was trying to build a relationship with my mum, whom I hadn't seen for at the time 10 years, and it was building blocks, slow building blocks. I had brothers and sisters and so on, so it wasn't straightforward. My mom said, "Look, you're my eldest son, you need to look after your brothers and sisters," and I'm like, they're not my children. That's the European response. But
Mm.
you kind of get into it after a while, and yeah, it took a while, but yeah, we built a good relationship with my mom and my siblings. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, in your blog, you sort of mentioned how from your 20s and into your 40s, you were helping out, or to your 40s, you were helping out sort of people that were less fortunate, in Bangladesh, sending money back home. Yeah, again, the typical sort of Bengali story. And a lot of people who maybe aren't Bengali, don't actually know about how a lot of your friends that are Bengali, their parents are sending money home to help out people at home, to help family members at home or siblings or whatever. And so that, that's why their parents are so hardworking or always working, or maybe can't come to those parents' evenings or whatever because they're always working because they need to send money back home. Um, you mentioned there about sort of you struggled to develop that relationship with your mum. Obviously, you'd not seen her for so long. You'd now pretty much, the vast majority of your life you'd grown up in England. Now your mum came with these sort of traditional views, and it was only eventually when your dad had passed and you say in your blog that you'd reluctantly taken on that father figure role. Um, what how does that make you feel now, like almost even like, because at the time you said they're not my children, they're yours, but what do you make of that right now?
I mean, it's you know, I, it's a difficult one. You know, I want my brothers and sisters to do well. I want them to flourish in the UK. Do I like being the head of the family? Not really. I don't. I kind of share the responsibility with my sister, and both of us have level heads. Um, yeah, my brothers are very different from me. My sisters are more similar to me. My brothers have traditional careers. One of them worked in restaurants until very recently. The other one is an engineer with cable engineer, fiber engineer. But their mindset are very different from me. I'm very forward thinking, but I don't begrudge them. That's their life. I lead my life according to my value base. But yeah, but I pull the family together when I need to, and we kind of show a united front when we need to.
I think the story that you have is a very interesting story. A story that's I'm sure a lot of people saw. Maybe not people that are listening because everyone's quite young that are listening, and I wouldn't have gone through the same things. But definitely the parents or people that are similar age of you will definitely relate to that and have a story very similar. And I'm sure your parents or all three of your parents are very proud of the achievements and things that you've done. Uh, Up to your life right now, and I'm sure the things that you are going to do in the future. I've got one final question to you, and it's a question that I like to ask every guest that comes on. Is what would your advice be to your 20-year-old self? What advice would you give to sort of 20-year-olds like my age, roughly?
Advice to myself or to you?
So I'm almost a bit of both, like advice to yourself, but advice that sort of could apply to 20-year-olds right now.
Um, people used to say to me, the world is your oyster. And I kind of looked at them thinking, what the hell do they mean? But actually, the world is your oyster. A 20-year-old is a global citizen these days. They sit at home and they connect with the entire world. I'm not going to say anything is possible. I'm not going to say you can do anything you want. You can't. You've got to wake up to the fact that you have a certain level of inherited skill set and you make the best use of them. Okay. You do history and what have you. It doesn't mean you're going to be a doctor. You may not have that skill sets to be a doctor, and that's okay. You may be good with your hands, and that's okay. Be a builder. That's fine. Um, don't let other people push you into a career that isn't right for you. Choose the career that's right for you. And I share this with my nephews and nieces. We all have gifts. We all have gifts. And these gifts come with a price. Our gifts need to be shared. A simple thing. It's time with your family. It's time with your friends. It's advising and supporting, and all of that's really, really important. Yeah. Don't measure success on money. Measure success on social values. What you do, what you give back to mankind. You're here to make the world a better place, not just to take and build yourself an empire. And by that, I'm not saying be a poor socialist. By all means, acquire wealth, but be willing to share it. We are blessed people. Tarek, if you speak to your father or your grandfather, if you speak to them properly, they'll say they got a golden ticket out of Bangladesh. And you're at university, your dad worked hard in that takeaway to ensure that you didn't have to do that. You've got a golden ticket. Anybody who's Bangladeshi will understand that we have something amazing. And being a migrant is special, I think. You have dual heritage, you can speak different languages, you have superpowers, you can do everything that your white counterpart can do and more, given the very fact that you worked in a takeaway and can deal with customer service in that manner makes you special. And for years we've been told as Bangladeshi people, you won't amount to anything, but you will, and we are as a community of people. But
Yeah.
my message to young people generally is, what, you can achieve amazing things. And the other thing I would say is do what you enjoy. Do what you enjoy and follow your dreams properly. And sometimes you may find your dreams don't pay. Okay, well, don't ditch them. Do them as a hobby. You don't have to give them up. Do them as a hobby. Do what you have to do to pay the bills until your hobby pays you enough to maybe ditch the job that you don't like doing. But follow your heart. Enjoy life.
And that is it for this week's episode of the Me, Myself, and Hopefully You podcast. I really do hope you enjoyed it. It's definitely a podcast episode where I learned a lot, and it really touched home. Aftab's story is just simply one of millions, not only in this country but around the world. And I'm sure if you're someone who has immigrant parents, you can relate to some of the things that Aftab was talking about. And even if you don't have immigrant parents, maybe you're British born and your parents were British born. Ultimately, let Aftab's story and the story of millions in this country and around the world serve as a reminder of the huge benefits of diversity, but also how despite adversity he faced, or despite the adversity he faced in his childhood, he still managed to achieve his life goal of serving and helping others. Make sure you check out Aftab's really interesting blog. It was the thing that inspired me to just get in contact with him and ask him straight away, please, will you come on, give me the chance to interview you? And I hope he enjoyed it as well. And I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure you also check out the exhibition that Aftab has helped to produce, which celebrates 50 years of Bangladesh. I'm hoping to go there once my exams are over and check it out. Which I'm really looking forward to. Maybe I'll vlog it. I don't know. I've never vlogged before, although I have vlogged on Snapchat and Instagram. So make sure you add me on there at Real Tariq Ahmed on pretty much everything. Speaking of Instagram, if you did enjoy it, then please do share it on your socials. Tag us on Instagram at MMHY Podcast. And hit that like button. Not because it does anything for me. This is a small podcast, but it does make me feel good. And you know what? We should all try and make each other feel good. And if there's some way that I can help make you feel better, then let me know and I'll try to do the same. Make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments below what was your favorite part of Aftab's story? What really hit home? But other than that, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Thank you so much for taking the time for me, taking the time to listen to this long ass outro. Have a great week. Until next time.